somebody told me I'm the first person to have resigned on Instagram. I mean, who knew?
Much more glamorous.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to Women with Balls, where I, Katy Balls, speak to today's trailblazers. There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. We might not be there yet, but the past 2 weeks have seen 52 ministerial resignations.
Go and spend some time with my family.
Leading a Prime Minister to resign.
Them's the breaks.
And 11 candidates vied to replace him, now whittled down to 2.
Thank you all very much.
Able to keep up? On today's episode of Women with Balls, we are going to hit the rewind button to the mass resignations that meant a new Prime Minister, and what goes through your mind when you're one of those ministers who ultimately decides to make the jump. My guest today has served in government since Theresa May appointed her in 2017 as the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Crime, Safeguarding and Vulnerability. As a Minister at the Home Office, she worked to deliver the landmark Domestic Abuse Act, before a stint as the Minister for Afghan Resettlement and the Minister for Prisons and Probation in September 2021. She spent much of her time being described as a rising star, but on the 6th of July she resigned from Johnson's government, citing that values such as integrity, decency, respect and professionalism had become fractured under Johnson's leadership. My guest today is Victoria Atkins. Victoria, thank you for joining us today. You have been on this podcast once before.
I have. What's the old saying about you do Katy Balls on the way up and Katy Balls on the way down? I don't know. I hope not.
We're not going for the way down at the moment, but if we have to, we'll add that in. No, we have pointed out recently, I think, that many have come here before greatness. Joanna Scanlon, I think, won a BAFTA after appearing on this podcast, and Liz Truss was promoted Foreign Secretary after, so that's just one to bear in mind.
No pressure.
Ahead of the reshuffle of the next Prime Minister. Now, Victoria, I mentioned in the introduction how turbulent politics in Westminster has been recently, and I wondered if you could just start with recent events. Now, you, of course, resigned from Boris Johnson's government just a few weeks ago, and I think for our listeners, because so much has been going on, it's easy to move past, I think, what was clearly a seismic 48 hours, which began, I think, with how Number 10 handled Chris Pincher and complaints against him. At the time, the Deputy Chief Whip, who had to step down for that role. Then the resignation of Sajid Javid, then Rishi Sunak. Then the next day, yours was one of several. So where to begin? I wondered, at what point this year did you start to really question your position?
As I said in my letter, I was very concerned at the handling of the Patterson events last year. You may recall that there was a report that the House had delivered, and on reading it, it seemed to be pretty clear cut as to what was said to have been done, and we were put in the position of having to basically vote the report down, and that was really difficult. And actually, that's where collective responsibility really shone through, because as ministers you are bound by collective responsibility. You may privately disagree and have your discussions, but you are ultimately bound by collective responsibility. And so lots of us were concerned. We voiced those concerns privately, but nonetheless we absolutely honoured the fact that we had to abide by collective responsibility. Obviously then that started to unravel. And then we went into Partygate, and that was an incredibly difficult time for everyone. I think, including actually Boris, because he was working under enormous pressure. Everybody there was working under enormous pressure, of course they were. And yet these things seem to have been going on, and I think there was a real shift in the public mood as these allegations came to light more and more. And then we had Chris Pincher, and the allegations about him come to light. And for me and for a lot of other colleagues, I think we were very concerned at how it was handled. And then on the Monday, our colleague Will Quince was sent out in the media round, which is something we all do, and it then the position changed after he was sent out. I actually had media that day as well, albeit a pre-record. And so I was a little bit sensitive about that as well. And then on the Tuesday night, completely out of the blue, Saj resigned, Rishi resigned, and I think we all just started reflecting on our own positions. There was absolutely no agreement, conspiracy, plot, whatever, to resign as a minister is a very lonely, long path. And we all felt that on the night before it happened.
And for those listeners who, I suppose, are less familiar with how the system works in terms of a morning round or doing media, is it the case that, Downstream will often tell you the lines to take or give you a suggestion, and therefore through the series of incidents you just outlined, was it the trust in what you're being told is the case started to deteriorate? Well,
when you're sent out on a media round, it's generally because you've got a policy to announce. So, in the course of all my ministerial appointments, I had really, really great policy announcements such as the Domestic Abuse Act, and you go ready to talk about your policy, but of course issues of the day are raised with you as well, because any journalist doing their job properly will ask you about other matters. So with the best will in the world, you cannot be, no single minister below the Prime Minister can be the expert on every single aspect of policy across government. We are specialists in our own areas. And so you rely on the briefings for example, for me it would be, trade policy or something like that. You get those briefings, you absolutely accept them in good faith. And, the people who work at Number 10 are very bright, very capable people. But what became more difficult with these situations is that it wasn't about policy. It became about who knew what, when, etc. And that's when it became pretty difficult, actually.
Now, you mentioned the point being when Sajid, Javid and Rishi Sunak resign. So that is the eve before the Prime Minister's question. So Boris Johnson was effectively battling through, saying he was going to fight on, but in the process just losing junior ministers by the hour, perhaps even more than that. So what was it like the night before? Was that the point when you started to think, maybe I am going to go?
I've actually, but you're right, that there was so much that happened in that 48 hours. There was also, of course, Lord Macdonald's letter, and he was a very senior civil servant. I'd never heard of him, I'd never met him, I didn't know him from Adam, but he wrote this letter and then did an interview setting out his understanding of a particular situation. And for any senior civil servant to do that, that's quite unusual. And so when after that we then had, as I say, the ball began to roll, I know for a fact that others were contemplating and thinking about it very, very carefully that day. But there was no coordination, and in fact you can tell that from the sort of the timing and the range of people that sent their letters in. But it was a very, very difficult Tuesday night because I was doing a job I love, a job I believe in. We were doing really great stuff, tackling violence against women and girls, that sort of thing. And so it's a big responsibility to say, actually, I need to step back from this.
Now, when it came to writing that resignation letter, I saw you're organising your school run.
Yes.
While also drafting, is that correct?
Yes. Because I've never thought through how one goes about resigning. I've never resigned from anything in my life, and so the actual mechanics of it, you sort of do your best and hope that first of all you're dealing with people with respect and dignity and doing it properly and courteously. But I woke up on it must be the Wednesday morning, and woke up quite early, and I thought, actually, I'm going to do it. And then I started drafting it before the school run. 8:00 is when we have to leave the house, and started drafting it, and then got my 10-year-old ready for school, teeth brushed, everything, and then dashed off and did the school run. And I remember standing in a coffee shop on my way back thinking, gosh, this is a bit odd, here I am standing in this coffee shop. I've got half a resignation letter ready, and I've got to finish the rest when I get back home. And then I did finish it, and then in a very good episode of The Thick of It, of course, when I then came to printing it out, the internet wasn't working, the printer wasn't working. Anyway, we got there. And
does that mean you're sending it to a machine that's just not putting it through?
Exactly, it just wasn't.
But it's your private printer. My fear would be it's suddenly about to merge and someone is going to find the thing before I've actually said I'm doing it.
Yeah, and just absolutely personal iPad, etc. But it's just one of those sort of lighter moments in what was actually pretty dark, pretty upsetting morning. But I got it printed out, and then I thought, right, I want to let my Secretary of State know and let the Chief Whip know. So I put phone calls through. I managed to speak to one of them, and then I sent it out. And it's, that's a really serious moment where you press send.
Because ultimately, the evening that Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid resigned, it felt as though it was a big blow to Boris Johnson, but they quickly filled those roles. So you had Nadhim Zahouri being Chancellor, Michelle Donlan as Education Secretary, and all the briefings coming out of Number 10 was, look, we can fill the positions, we're going to keep going. This is a setback, but we can now actually have the economic plan we want. So in a way, from observing from Parliament, watching it, the death knell was actually really just a continuous flow of resignations the next day, of which you were one. So did you have people trying to say, don't do this, getting in touch, or not so much?
No, again, I think for someone to make that decision, it's their decision alone. And look, I totally respect colleagues who, made their decision to stay. I totally get that. But you couldn't possibly, and nobody tried. One couldn't put any pressure on another colleague to do anything, because it is their decision. It's their career, their livelihood, their conscience.
Now, I want to talk about the future of the Tory party, but just before we do get there, it's interesting, obviously, hearing the events, how there were so many distractions in the sense you no longer felt as though you could focus on your brief because the level of Number 10 scandals that dominate even a positive news announcement. But I wondered if also some of the negative briefings from Downing Street played a factor, because certainly in the case of Oliver Dowden, you would have a situation where various figures, and we never quite know who the source behind anonymous quotes are, were ultimately suggesting he might be sacked anyway as party chairman, which then I think, given he was the first resignation after the double by-election, it probably made his decision a bit easier had they not been there. And certainly I think after the confidence vote in Boris Johnson, your name sometimes appeared among some of your colleagues suggesting you hadn't been pro-Boris Johnson enough publicly. How did that feel?
It felt pretty unfair, actually, because I have been entirely loyal to this administration and to since I've been elected since 2015. I am a loyalist. I'm a Conservative through and through, and I absolutely believed in Boris when he was selected as our leader, our Prime Minister, and then went on to win that amazing election victory and delivered Brexit, and then coped through COVID, that extraordinary period of time. And I was being sent out to talk on behalf of the government, which I really appreciated and I took very, very seriously. And so it was a bit... It's part of, sadly, it seems to be part of politics, but I'm not sure it's terribly good for general morale. I wouldn't dream of speaking for others, but I'm not sure it's terribly good for general morale. I'll put it tactfully like that, yeah.
I suppose some people listening to this podcast might say, well, if it was really that bad, why didn't you resign sooner? Why resign when, already some people were already out there? I wonder, what would you say to them about...
It genuinely was an escalation, and again, because... we're all incredibly committed as ministers to our roles. We work very, very hard in the background. People don't necessarily see it, but every minister will get their red box every evening. They get their weekend boxes. Some days, my days were measured in 15-minute slots because I had so much racing around to do between commitments, meetings, parliamentary business and so on. So it's a real vocation, not just a job. And I personally felt an enormous duty, not just to the government, but also to the people we're trying to help, victims of crime, particularly rape victims. And we're doing some really, really positive work within the criminal justice system. So for me, I needed to be sure that it was the right thing to do, and it took time. It took time to get there.
Now, I wanted, looking back on this, now we're speaking just after Boris Johnson's final Prime Minister's questions, and the entire Tory party sat in the Commons chamber, including yourself, gave the Prime Minister a standing ovation.
Quite right, yeah.
So what do you think the problem was? Do you think Boris Johnson was dishonest, or do you think he was let down by the people around him?
Gosh, I don't know. I suspect political historians will be studying this in years to come. I think he'd done such an amazing job for us, both with the 2019 election and with Brexit and with the pandemic. But if you look at any prime ministerial career, they come to an end, and it's usually not of a time or of a process of their choosing. And so I think that was the case here as well.
And just two final ones, Boris, and I want to talk about the future of the party, which is just one which is, we spoke about this on your last podcast with us, which is a few years ago now, because you were once in the news for your own conversation with Boris Johnson, where you took him to task. Or maybe you can tell me if I'm phrasing it wrong, but he claimed in an interview that that money spent investigating historic cases of child sex abuse was being spaffed off the wall. And I just wondered, do you think the Prime Minister learnt from that experience after that?
So I've never confirmed that. You're being very, very cunning, if I may say so. But
reports at the time.
Reports at the time. Look, what I can say is I genuinely was really blown away by his absolute commitment to helping victims of sexual abuse when he was Prime Minister. So the rate review, the work that we did through that, he absolutely gave that his 100% personal commitment, and was regularly being briefed on what we're up to, and he really, really did. So I'm not. So
you think he does take those issues seriously?
I really do. I genuinely do, and I think, as I say, I'm neither confirming nor denying, but his record over the last couple of years, I think, actually stands alone and speaks for itself.
Sure, and then we're going to talk about the future leader, but just at a time when obviously the candidates are being whittled down, there has been some backlash from certain members in the Tory grassroots and I think some voters who probably don't follow politics that closely and are just wondering why the Prime Minister is no longer going to be Prime Minister. And I just wondered what you might say to them when we are starting to see a bit of a movement to say, should it be right that MPs can oust a leader? Do you understand why there might be some upset in the country?
I do, but then I remind myself that we live in a parliamentary democracy, so we do not live in a presidential system. The Conservative Party, led by Boris, and I don't take that away, at all, but the Conservative Party won the last election, and the leader of the day, any Prime Minister of the day, if one takes, if we take a step out of 2022 and just think about it in the round, the Prime Minister of the day has to have the confidence of their parliamentary party, and I think the events of 2 weeks ago with ministers resigning and so on, that showed sadly that the time had moved on.
Now, we are talking during a leadership contest, and it's been a bruising period. So before we get to the candidates, what do you think the Tory party has to do now in order to kind of deliver on its promises, but also potentially win a fifth term, which no party has done?
Well, look, first of all, I think it's amazing that we had such a diverse list of candidates, from all across the board. At the very beginning, there was, I think, 11 candidates. They represent our country in the 21st century. I'm so proud of our party for doing that. And we're now at the stage, we're just ahead of the announcement, so we'll find out the final two, but we will have, the final three candidates, 2 are women, and we have Rishi. So whatever the final 2 looks like, and obviously I hope Rishi is in there, but it's going to be an incredibly modern offering to the country, something that Labour has never ever got within sniffing distance of achieving. And I think that it does show that we're just very open to moving with society. If we don't move with society, we will lose as an electoral party. And so I genuinely think that the ideas we've heard are really exciting.
And you're backing Rishi Sunak. Do you worry in a sense that there does seem to be a block? You think Rishi Sunak's responsible for bringing Boris Johnson right? We hear it. Do you know what I mean? Like, as in, we hear it from certain people who've served under Boris Johnson. We hear it in anonymous briefings. Do you think Rishi Sunak can really unite the Tory party?
Yeah, I do. And I think, I hope, look, we're in a very it's the white heat of an election, a leadership election at the moment, and so there will be conversations, briefings, and so on. But if, as I hope, Rishi's in the final two, and if, as I hope, he secures the leadership, then we will settle down and things will fall into place. And whoever wins, I am absolutely determined to support them. You know, it's an extraordinary thing to put yourself forward for this role. Just if you look at some of the scrutiny some of the candidates have had, and by the way, we've got an amazing 3 candidates left by it, but, you know, some of the scrutiny stroke criticisms they've had, you know, they're really being put through their paces, and so it is on each and every one of us as members of the party to get behind the new leader in September and really help them make it work.
So I think you've probably already answered this, but that means, I mean, we're speaking when it's Liz Truss, Penny Mordaunt, Rishi Sunak, but if any of those 3 were to become Prime Minister, you will be happy to fully back them, serve if asked. Yeah.
I'd be absolutely delighted, because I think they're both, look, they've got different strengths, and I believe very firmly in Rishi, but look, others, my friends, my colleagues believe in the other 2 candidates as well, and I would fully respect and support them.
And just, I suppose, looking at the briefs you've been on, a few couple of final questions. I mean, is there anything that you're particularly worried might not be carried through by the next leader, or you think there needs to make sure there is continuity on, but from hearing some of the debates?
So I think there are some areas of policy where clearly the leadership candidates will take different approaches, and there is that sort of freedom, if you like, to do that. In my own area of expertise, the criminal justice system, I would very much hope, and indeed I suspect they will all, and Rishi indeed has already committed to this, we will of course continue our work to improve justice for victims. Rishi's announced that we're going to have a victims and sentencing bill. We're going to really tackle grooming gangs and so on. So that's a moral imperative to continue that work. So I'm confident that other people would want to continue it as well. As for economic matters and so on, they are showing their difference in approaches, and it will be for the membership to decide which approach they most prefer. And
just on your brief, so you're no longer in this role, but you were as Minister for Afghan Resettlement. And I just wondered, it's obviously one of those things, there's lots of media focus at the time, lots of pleas to, let more people in and so forth. How do you think that there should be more attention to it now? It feels it's almost dropped off, I suppose, the public's gaze a bit. But from your experience of dealing with actually the technicalities of housing these people who come here, I just wonder if you felt like there should be more focus now, or if there is kind of still the same level of enthusiasm amongst the public as there was at the time.
Well, crikey, if you think of the last year, we've moved from the pandemic to Afghanistan and then to Ukraine, and so at each and every turn the public has shown their resilience but also their enthusiasm to help. But inevitably, if you have that sort of, if you like, that train of events running down the train tracks, then the media and others' focus will move away to what's happening at the moment. I mean, the Afghanistan war, it was an extraordinary public and human rights exercise to evacuate something like 15,000 people, to every single one of them who landed in the UK that night. They were given a home, they were given a bed, they were given food, they were absolutely looked after, which just the logistics of moving that many people at once over a 2-week period, the logistics of that was quite something to behold. And then from then, we have, by the time I gave the roll up in January, we had housed something like 6,000 people over 6 months. That's the highest resettlement rate of any programme we've ever had. But it's really tricky because, we're not only talking about bricks and mortar, it's the supply of the homes, but also, of course, getting children into school, making sure that adults can speak English as well as they possibly can, trying to help them with jobs, trying to help them with access to healthcare and so on. and also the trauma of having been through what they had been through. So it was a fascinating job to do, and it will continue to this day. But then Ukraine came up, and clearly we all wanted to help with that, and that has taken some of the media attention, which I can understand.
Now, the final two questions I want to ask you, and see how this goes. But I wondered if you'll say, I suppose, one thing you think perhaps you've learned from Boris Johnson's premiership, or whether it's from the man himself or just, from the past few years, and then one thing you hope the next leader might do differently.
Those are good questions. So with Boris, I think the fact that with Boris, an awful lot of people, when they think of Boris, a smile comes to their lips. And I think he brings such a joie de vivre, if you like, to political life. He has his own way of communicating that clearly reaches people, and he has an extraordinary resilience, if you think about it, with the work that he's gone through during COVID, being so terribly ill with himself and so on. I think that for me has been a real sort of pleasure to watch, and I very much hope that we will be able to continue that as a political party moving forward with the new leader. With the new leader, I think we need to remind ourselves of the difference between campaigning and governing. We were very good at campaigning, but that is a different skill from governing. And I very much hope that the next PM will have that uppermost in their mind, not least because we can't, in this 24/7 news channel, real Twitter and so on, we can't react to every headline. We just can't. We've got to have our sort of fundamental values and strategies and principles running through the government, and that is what we've got to stick to as part of our governing of the country. It's an extraordinary privilege to be able to do that.
And you've actually taken Boris Johnson at PMQ saying Twitter should not be the main focus, but you've taken that approach quite literally in your career. You're still not on.
I came off it. I came off it in, I can't remember, 2016, something like that. I haven't missed it for a moment. I loved it. And I found out the other day, somebody told me I'm the first person to have resigned on Instagram. I mean, who knew? There we go.
Much more glamorous. Yeah. Did you put a filter on it, or
no? We had to. We couldn't fit it on the photo, so we cut off the lovely letterhead at the top. And anyway, so it wasn't visually as perfect as I would like. But you got to do it. You got to get it.
Congratulations on making history. Thank you, Victoria, for joining us today.
Thanks so much. I loved it.